Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here. I would love to know before we get started, if you can hear me, see me, uh, say something in the chat. Let me know. These webinars are always haunted with tech problems, so I'm gonna make sure that we have that out of the way before we get going. All right, cool. We're good. All right. Um, okay. All right, off we go. Cool. So thanks for being here. Welcome. My name's John. I'm the founder at Unveiled, and we are a video production company. We work specifically with colleges on colleges and universities on their video storytelling and commercial marketing videos. And today we are talking about the art of the interview. And we're going to be talking about this from a video perspective. That's just the world that I live in, but you can apply this to interviewing someone for an article or something like that too. But the heart and soul of a documentary style storytelling really comes down to the interview. And when I say documentary storytelling, I mean, real, it's not a scripted voiceover, it's not storyboarded really. But it all really comes down to the questions that you ask and the meaningful responses that you get, and then how you package those together. And that's all going to play a major role in the quality of your video. So whether you're writing the questions or you're asking the questions or you're managing people who do that stuff, this is for you. So glad you're here. Some quick housekeeping. Feel free to utilize the chat. Feel free to connect with each other, post your LinkedIn profiles. That's one of the things that I like to do when I join a webinar is connect with other people. So let this be a space for that. There will be Q&A at the end, so you can use the Q&A function to submit questions. Try not to put them in the chat because they might get buried. All right, off we go. So today we're gonna learn why boring questions lead to boring videos. We're gonna talk about the anatomy of a good interview question list, basic questions you should always ask, a hack for getting concise responses, how to best prepare your subject to be comfortable and conversational, and then we're going to talk about my chat GPT workflow that is going to make your life easier. So I'm going to share with you a lot of the inside stuff that we do at Unveiled, just literally copied and pasted for you to use on your own. So, but I want to take you to 2012. So it's 2012. I was working for a production company where I was the creative director, and we were mostly doing high-end weddings. But this big university came knocking, and they wanted us to do a story on their HR executive education program. And they were like, "We want something different." I remember sitting in this meeting. They said, "We want you to do for us what you do for weddings, like make people feel something. It's like cinematic storytelling, all this." So great. We're super excited. It's our first big, corporate job. And so we get to the shoot day and I'm interviewing these HR leaders, and these guys have written books and stuff. So like super smart people. And I'll never forget this one interview. I'm interviewing this gentleman who's just this big shot, HR leader. And I wanted to get him talking about creating organizational change. Like that was my vision for the video, was have this be kind of like a thought leadership type thing rather than a direct sell for like why you should come join the program. And I wanted to get him talking about generally like how do you get over this uh, uh, organizational change, like resistance, like this is the way we've always done things kind of mentality within an organization. And my thinking was to get him talking about that, not really just a direct sell. But the client kept interjecting in that interview with what I thought at the time were really boring questions. So I'm trying to ask these, like, get him to talk about something different, creating a different kind of video. And she kept saying, why should someone enroll in this program? Or she'd interrupt and say, what are students going to learn in this program? And it was a really frustrating experience for me as a young director, not knowing, not having much experience in handling creative differences like that. And I just kept thinking, you can get anyone to say this. You can put all that info on the landing page for the program, but let's not lead with that. To this day, that client and I are friends, and it's just a funny story. And but eventually, we got to the edit. It was one of those situations where we delivered what we thought was really something really compelling and different. By the time the client, got through with it, it was something different. It was really more of a direct sell, and so it really taught me two things. One, be really clear by what you mean by storytelling and what you mean by different as going into a project. Do you actually want something more informational, or do you want something that's going to be a less of a direct sell that's going to imply the value of what you're marketing rather than just coming out and listing features and benefits? Because that's going to really impact the questions that you ask. As well, the second thing I learned was, we'll get into this in a minute, boring questions are actually necessary to a well-rounded question list. So without them, you really can have some major blind spots in your video, and we'll talk about that in the coming slides. So these are boring questions. And like I said, we're going to talk about why you should include questions like this in your question list, but these are very obvious questions. Why should someone come to the school? What do you like about the professors? That kind of thing. And boring, like asking obvious questions is going to lead to very obvious answers, and obvious responses is going to lead to videos that just look like every other college. So you ask somebody like, why should somebody come to the school? They're going to say 9 times out of 10, because it's great. Small class sizes, great professors, great community. That's every college. I mean, I can't think of anyone that I've ever interviewed that answered that question much differently than that. Um, and then, you ask, well, what do you like about the campus? Well, it's really beautiful. There's lots of buildings, students walking around, blah, blah, blah. Again, that's all colleges. So questions like these aren't going to lead to much differentiation. And we can think about differentiation in a few different ways. I mean, one would be like, hey, overhaul all of your programs and focus on this very niche type of student. And that's what's going to make you different. Or, we can embrace the fact that, hey, a lot of colleges are kind of playing in the same ball field, competing for the same students. And so one of the biggest ways that I think we can differentiate ourselves is how we talk about what we do that's similar to what other colleges do, because no two people can really claim the same stories, that your college can claim. So that's just how we like to think about differentiation, and it really funnels down to the types of questions that you're asking and how you direct this video if you want to get something that's going to be different. So take what I just said. I'm going to set it aside for a minute, because you do want to have basic questions. In my corporate video days, we would sometimes fall into this trap. We would ask too many what I call woo-woo questions. Be sitting with a CEO or something and ask them, well, why are you passionate about this work? Like, why does this work matter? And things like those are all great questions. But then we get to the edit and realize, like, shoot, we didn't even ask them what the company does. So we had this major gap, and it's like, oh man, we should have just asked some basic questions. So you do need to cover your bases with foundational stuff. For instance, when you're marketing a particular degree program, you've got a student in front of you. You might be tempted to just ask them, about their experience. But depending on how you're going to use this video, your viewers might be like, okay, like, glad she liked it, but what is the program? Like, what will I learn? Um, so depending on how you're going to use that video, it's really important to craft your questions and your responses accordingly. So you want those basic questions, so you have the option to go more informational if you need to. And then you want deeper questions. And this is where, I really focus the bulk of my brain is on these deep questions. How can I create questions to ask students or alumni or whoever I'm interviewing that are going to lead to responses that are different? So deep questions are going to lead to specific moments, specific stories, specific emotions or feelings. And this is also where you can design some questions that can get some personality to come out of the person that you're interviewing. So we did, a couple years ago, we started working with University of Chicago, their Data Science Institute. And these folks are just analytical to the max. I mean, like math, science, STEM folks, and for pre-interviewing these alumni, a series of alumni, and I went. These conversations were kind of dry, and it was hard to get them to come out of their shell a little bit. So we went back to the drawing board, and I told my client, I said, we need to come up with some curveball questions here. So one of them ended up being, if you had $500 to spend in Chicago and only 24 hours to spend it, where would you go? And so this one guy really lit up when I asked him that, and all of a sudden we learned what a foodie he is. He starts talking about all his favorite Michelin star restaurants, which ended up becoming this really fun social snippet that the university can use to market like why someone would want to move to Chicago for school. It's a different way of saying Chicago's great than just saying, well, it's a big city, it's lively, it's got a lot of businesses, and there's a Starbucks on every corner and stuff like that. That's just a different way of flipping that question to say like, here's $500. What are you going to do with it? And then the students would just take us on these kind of journeys through. You get to see like what they're interested in. And then lastly, you have fill in the blank questions. And this is largely serving two purposes. Number one, it's guaranteeing concise responses. And number two, it's bettering your chances of getting good sound bites for an opening hook or a powerful closing statement, which we're going to talk about more in depth in a little bit. There's two resources here, a couple of QR codes. I know that QR codes is a hot topic. I thought like this was an appropriate place for a QR code. So get out your phone, scan these QR codes, and so this one, the one here under the deep questions one, this is a link to a 100 interview questions covering 10 different themes in higher ed that higher ed likes to talk about. And so that's just something you can bookmark and just keep handy for when you're coming up with. Thank you, Chris. For Thanks, Chris, for posting the link there. That's just something you can keep handy for when you are needing to come up with ideas for interview questions. It's got some just different ways, like typical things you might want someone to say, but here's a way to spin them. Um, and then fill in the blank questions. We've got the Talking Tactics podcast episode with Dave Builds that I was on there talking about my tactic, which is these fill in the blank questions. So we're going to go into it a little bit, but you can listen to that episode for a really deep dive into how to utilize fill in the blank questions in what you're doing. So, okay, onward. And then we have a bonus fourth thing that makes a good question list. Because how you lead the conversation can really make a big impact on the depth of responses you get. So when you validate the person that's in front of you, and say things like, "Oh, wow, like, you heard what they said, and oh, you must have felt this," or "Wow, that must have been really exciting or really challenging." Oftentimes when you validate them and when they feel seen, there's this moment where they just go, "Yes," like, and they kind of relax and open up. And usually they're going to give you some gold after that because they feel like they can expound on that and they feel seen. Um, the other one is affirmation. So one tip that I like to say is we'll do a few questions and I'll stop and be like, "Wow, you're really good at this. Like, have you done this before?" And, and they usually kind of relax at that point and go, "Oh, okay. So I'm doing okay." Because they always show up super nervous. Everyone, I mean, very few people want to be on camera and very few people are like really comfortable in that situation. So the job of the interviewer is to kind of help them come out of their shell a little bit. But when it comes to validation, like I'm just really not great at that. Like I will admit it. If you're telling me about your difficult day you had at work or something, I'm really bad at knowing like what to say and and how to make you feel seen without like trying to fix it or come across like I'm minimizing it or something like that. So for me, my best bet, is to write follow-up questions into your question list. So anticipate what they might say and how you will follow up and make it a conversation rather than just interrogating them with question after question. Um, so yeah, like I said, wow, you must have felt this, that must have been this or whatever. Um, so those are a couple of good tools in your follow-up that are going to help them kind of come out of their shell a little bit and get a little more comfortable and get a little more vulnerable. Because that's really what we want. We're going for some level of vulnerability in a lot of video creation and storytelling that we do. That's going to lead to something that's just going to resonate more than just something that's going to be obvious that people would say about why they like the college. Okay, so I'm going to play a quick montage here of how some well-designed interview questions played out and in the result and then the resulting videos. So there's gonna be questions that we asked and then what the response was. So I will play that for you now. And also let me know in the chat if you are having any trouble here in the video or anything like that. It's gonna take a second here.
The late aughts, I'll say, 2008, Netflix basically challenged the community to do better about recommending movies to people. And it turns out that was a pretty hard problem and still remains a hard problem. I saw it come in to an academic seminar where someone says, I think math solves this problem. And when I realized that there's like a fundamental connection to modern day data questions, it felt like the beginning of something new.
My absolute favorite thing to bake, macarons, because I feel like they're so particular and they're so precise. Like if you do one extra fold, they're done for. I think that's what I enjoy about it most. And they're just so tiny and cute, and I like tiny desserts, so it works out.
Moving away from home was a big challenge for me. Oh, I was homesick, for sure. It's not that living away from, like, my parents was hard. It was just adjusting to a whole new atmosphere for me. I don't like being in a big atmosphere not knowing everybody that I'm around. Because back at my high school, I knew every single person. I could walk out the door and be like, oh, hey, what's up? And here at Cleary, by the second week of school, I knew majority of the people on our floor. I knew everybody that we lived with.
My mother passed about 4 years ago now. And that's one of the things that she always wanted for me is to get the higher education, be the first one, being her only child. So I was thinking of her on that day as I walked across the stage, finally completing that degree. And I think it was a week later, just before Mother's Day, somewhere around that time, that I actually went out and I took a copy of my bachelor's degree and I rolled it up, put it in a bouquet of flowers and put it on her grave. I would definitely recommend Cleary to anyone who's thinking about going to college and furthering their education. This is the way to go.
All right, so that's just a little montage of some moments from various videos that I felt brought out a little personality, just something a little bit different. The last one with that police officer, he's like the deputy chief of police at the Detroit Police Department, so he's like the number two guy there, and it was one of the most challenging interviews because we get to the interview, we get all set up, and we're waiting for him for like an hour, like he's like an hour late. And time's running out because we got to go film someone else too. And so he comes in, he's like, I only got 15 minutes for this interview. I don't think he really understood how videos work. So that was a very quick interview. We had to really get to the meat of the questions, and it ended up being one of my favorite videos. Just that story about his mom was just so moving, and you can ask all the deep questions in the world, but really great storytelling starts with a good story first. And so, when you have a good story to begin with, then the way that you get them to, the creative ways that you get them to tell it is kind of the icing. If you start with the boring story, there's no amount of like cool questions that you can ask that's going to make that interesting. And then the other little anecdote I wanted to share was Maya, the girl who was homesick. So I was interviewing her, and we were doing this piece. We were telling her story in service of marketing the residence halls, like they have these like apartments, um, that like apartment style dorms, and it was a really dry interview. I was really struggling. She was really nervous, like really stiff, and it was hard to like get. She was giving me very short, blunt answers, and then finally I was like, you know what? Let me just throw something in here. Like, were you homesick? Because I remember back to when I was in college, I was very homesick. Like my freshman year of college, I moved to Baltimore from Detroit. It was a very different experience. And so I was like, I wonder if that's the same way for you. Like, were you homesick? And then all of a sudden, she just opens up and gets real vulnerable. And now we've got a hook. Now we've got an emotional hook for this thing that's not just like, come to the residence halls because they're great. Um, so that's just something I wanted to point out there. Okay. So good questions on the left, better questions on the right. Again, these good questions are pretty basic, pretty standard, but simple reframing of them can lead to more novel responses. So, for instance, why should someone enroll in this program? You can ask that, and that's good. But a better way, an upgrade to that question would be, can you tell me about a time when you felt really good about your decision to study here? Another one, what's your favorite spot on campus? Upgrading that would be, is there a place on campus that holds special meaning for you? Tell me about it. One of the ones I like is, what's the food like on campus? Uh, Instead of saying that, they might just say like, oh, it's great. It's like, I'm gluten free, so there's like some gluten free stuff, and like you can get like Asian or you can get Mexican or whatever. But what's the best meal you've ever had? Sell me on it. The best meal you've ever had on campus. Sell me on it. Let's get them to talk just like that bakery student that was like macarons. Like this is macarons are it for me as a baker. And you see her kind of light up and just is like, I love these small desserts. And so that's how you kind of upgrade questions a little bit to get less generic responses. How, going to like an adult student here, how does the program's flexible nature make going back to school achievable? Very common thing that we ask, very common topic that we touch on with adult students for graduate programs. And instead, you could say, tell me about some of the major priorities in your life outside of school, like work and family. So in a minute, I'm going to show you how, actually, nope, I changed that slide. So I will just tell you the story. But so I asked, I was interviewing a married couple, and they're both police officers for this, because this university, Cleary University, has like this program for first responders that can go back to school and get degrees. And I asked her that. I was like, tell me some of the major priorities in your life outside of school and things like that. And she starts talking about how like their busy schedule. She's like, I have I have 3 kids. We've got soccer, we've got dance, we've got all this stuff. The kids are in school. I got to pick them up. We got to do all this stuff. Like our weeks are just full. And I didn't think that I would be able to go back to school. And people told me I was crazy to go back to school with, her husband and her working full time and all this stuff. And she's like, and then she goes, but I just felt like I'm gonna do it. And so that was the hook for that video, was like, I've got 3 kids, I've got blah, 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 I've got all this stuff. And people told me I was going to be crazy for going back to school, but I just knew I was going to do it. And then boom, now we're off. Now we're out. That's a hook that you can start with. That's better than saying, oh, I'm so and so, and I am a graduate of the university and yada yada. So and then this is what I changed the slide to. Why did you decide to go back to school? And one of my favorite ways of framing a question like that, because what you're really asking is, was there a turning point for you? What you're trying to get at is, what was that thing? What was the catalyst? So I just like to ask, what was a turning point for you where you knew you needed to make a change? So I'm gonna play this video. Um, Interviewed this woman, Renee, who just completely did a 180 with her career and went back to school. And this was her response to that turning point question.
I was working in the debt collections industry for about 15 years, and I was miserable, could not stand it. It was a very competitive, very toxic environment. I would go to work and sit in my car and dread going into the building, or I would take my lunch and leave the building and just sit in my car because I didn't want to go anywhere, but I didn't want to interact with anybody that I was working with. I was drained. I was exhausted, I was upset, there was a whole gamut of negative feelings that just kept on dropping on my chest every day. And I really had that kind of like aha moment, like I need to do something, otherwise this is just gonna be how it is for the rest of my life, and that was not my interest. So I looked around at schools.
And now she's at Baker, and then she went to Baker College. So, and then we were that again, I think that was the hook for that video, if I remember correctly. Like that's kind of what we led in with. And then we get to Baker and we show the logo, and then it's like, okay, boom, here's all this great stuff about Baker. But starting with that storytelling is a way of hooking people. And that turning point question is a favorite of mine. So, do you need to draw out stories in your interviews? No. So if your goal is something more informational, you can still ask, better questions that lead to novel responses. A lot of the videos that we do on Unveiled aren't actual stories. Like they're more like profiles of students. Sometimes like a student like Renee has a literal story. Like she's like, this happened, this was hard, here was a barrier, I overcame the barrier, and now here's the result. But a lot of students, even like the one Hannah, the baking and pastry student with the macarons, she didn't really have a story. And I tried to dig one out of her in the pre-interview process, and there just wasn't much there. But she was so bubbly, and like she was such, and that's been one of my favorite videos that we've created. Also because I love cooking, I'm super into Top Chef right now. So anytime we get to film food, so if you're a culinary school on this webinar, uh, get at me. But her thing wasn't really like a narrative story, but the questions we ask can help draw out personality, and that's also good. That I would put that in the storytelling category. Um, but it's this difference of what I refer to as narrative versus declarative stories. So oftentimes when people use the word storytelling, they mean something broader than a literal story. They mean some sort of message that's packaged in a creative way. But dissecting that a bit, there's two paths you can take. A narrative story is things happened and this was the result. And these stories are generally retelling things that happened in the past. A declarative story might be something more technically informational, but told in a creative way. So if you're going for a narrative vibe where you want to transport your viewer into this moment in time, where they're envisioning these events playing out in their mind, then, you want to ask narrative inducing questions. Otherwise, not everything has to be a literal story in a marketing context. When we say storytelling, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to tell a narrative story for it to be like correct or something like that. I mean, there's so much, there's such a spectrum with that word storytelling. But I think what we try to get at, like the foundation of the definition of that broad term storytelling, is something different, something a little bit more vulnerable, something more novel, something that's not just generic. So a little decision tree for you. If you want to inspire, if you want your viewer to connect with the subject, if you want to suck people in, like that kind of that start of that video with Renee and working at the call center, um, narrative questions are going to be your friend. Do you want to inform? Okay, so let's just couch this as more of a declarative thing. This is a little more informational, but we're going to try to get some personality to come out. And then, do you want to inspire and inform? So you want to wrap that declarative message in a narrative. And that's what we ended up see the whole video with Renee. It starts out with that narrative story that she tells, and then we launch into Baker College and here's all the great things about the program, blah 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 blah. And then we end with a story, like her recap or like she finishes the story basically saying she's super happy now, she loves her job, she's thriving. So that's like one way you can sort of wrap information in a story. Okay. Fill in the blank questions. This is my favorite hack. And I don't think I invented fill in the blank questions, but I did come up with this because I mean, for so many years we do an interview and then kind of just leave it to chance that there would be an opening hook or a closing statement because those are really important. The opening hook is the most important thing because if no one watches this video, who cares what else you say? If people click off it doesn't matter what you're talking about. So I want to really up my chances, just short of guaranteeing that I'll have a good hook, and building that into the interview questions. And then also a closing soundbite, because a lot of times what happens when you leave it up to chance, you just ask kind of questions, you're not really looking for a certain type of response for a certain part of the video. You get to the end of the video and you're just kind of left with whatever scraps, and then that's when you show your boss and they're like, I feel like it just kind of ends like it doesn't really end on a powerful note. But you can control that in the interview with these fill in the blank prompts, because what these do is they reduce rambling. They provide concise, impactful sound bites, really great for short and long form answers, and they help optimize for that opening hook and closing statement. So you might say, one of these prompts might be, the best thing I've gotten from our alumni network is blank. So that person would then say, the best thing I've gotten from our alumni network is my current job at Google. I met somebody that was an alum of the program, yada, yada. They tell the story. And now I have this job and I love it. So you could get a similar response if you ask, what's the best thing you've gotten from the alumni network, but you might get a more rambling response. You might now start the sentence not in a direct way that's going to work really well for your edit. Sometimes you just want them to be just really clear. Best thing I got from the alumni network is. And so all of that really helps, because then you can use the best thing I got for the alumni network is my job at Google. You could just use that, or you can expand on that and use the whole elaborate version if you want to go deeper. So I'm gonna play this. This is Ben. This is something we filmed this last month with the Data Science Institute at U Chicago. And the question was without, I forget the exact phrasing. I think it's like without this program blank, but we'll play it.
Okay, without this program, blank.
Without this program, I would be so bored right now, because I'm finding so much entertainment and fulfillment from diving into all of this new, rapidly changing machine learning and AI stuff that I wouldn't be working on, most likely, if I didn't come back to school to do this program.
All right, and here's how it ended up in the actual.
Without this program, I would be so bored right now. I'm finding so much entertainment from all of this new, rapidly changing machine learning and AI stuff that I wouldn't be working on, most likely, if I didn't come back to school to do this program.
So Ben's responses were often like a little bit long-winded, a lot of pauses in there, so we had to clean that up. But I don't think we would have gotten him to say something so like candid or just something kind of quirky and novel like that if we had asked him just like, what do you like about this program? So that's an example of how you can control sound bites like that by starting the sentence and letting them fill in their answer. you at least get the part that you need. Because sometimes you just need the student to say, this school is awesome. So sometimes our fill in blank prompts will be like school, like Baker College is blank, and they can interpret that however they want. Um, so so that's that. So here's some examples, without school blank, or the school has changed the way I blank. In that same series of the first responders, we asked one gentleman, different police officer, you know, Cleary has changed the way I blank. And he said, oh, I grew up, Cleary's changed the way that I think about school, I think about my education, because I grew up in a rough household. I had a rough childhood. I wasn't a good student. I didn't think I could handle, getting a college degree, but they made it easy. So, I mean, that was gold. And I think that's how we ended the video. Or school is blank, like I mentioned, they can kind of, this is pretty vague, and they can kind of fill it in however they want. I was never the same after blank. I like that a lot. It's kind of in line with that turning point. One time I asked an alum of a program, just kind of threw this in there in a pre-interview, was like, yeah, fill in the blank here. I was never the same after blank. And he started talking about his new baby, and being a new dad, and how now all of his focus is on this child, and the program he was going to, and all this stuff was just in service of this child that he loves. And then he started talking about how, the program made it really accessible for him as a new dad, and having a full-time job and things like that. So just another way of teeing somebody up to say something interesting. We did all these series of athletics videos for this one school. These are a couple that we use on this team. You can't be afraid to blank. Winning games comes down to blank. So you can, and ChatGPT is good for using this, which we'll get into in a second here. Preparing your subjects. This is incredibly important to a quality interview. And one of my main pieces of advice is to send them the questions ahead of time. This is a debate in the video world whether or not you should do this. On one side, you have folks that think, if the questions are a surprise, you'll get more off the cuff responses. On the other hand, you have, folks like me who say if you send them the questions ahead of time, you avoid putting them on the spot and them saying something surface level because they couldn't think of anything better to say in the moment. And for many years, I was on the side of not sending the question list. That until I guessed it on my first podcast, I remember the host wasn't going to send me the questions, and it made me really uncomfortable. And I wanted to have an idea in my mind how the conversation would go, so I could think of, some bullet points I wanted to touch on rather than just be stumped, in the moment. Because if you stump me in the moment, if I'm on your podcast and you throw me a curveball, I might just start rambling and say, just, I don't know, just start rambling. And then eventually I'll figure out, like, I'll get on track with what I want to say, but I'll just start rambling until something, something hits me. But this is a really uncomfortable moment for me. Um, but then I realized, that's what I'm doing to every other person I'm interviewing by not sending them the questions. They're already uncomfortable, and I'm just making them more uncomfortable by keeping them in the dark. So that's just my opinion. You do what works best for you. What you want to avoid is them showing up with scripted lines and being really glued to this, whatever they wrote out. So that can happen. That's one casualty of sending them the questions ahead of time. But your job as the interviewer is to kind of coach them out of that, get them to put down their script, and kind of start from scratch, just conversational. And then setting expectations in terms of how the filming will go, what to wear, makeup and stuff. This is the exact copy that we send to all of our interview subjects. It's going to be a super casual conversation. It's going to be heavily edited to make you sound good. We want you to ramble. We want you to go on tangents. In fact, we encourage that. In actuality, we don't. We want them to just say gold nuggets all the left and right, and have them be very concise. It's just not going to happen. And if you put the pressure on the person to do that, it's going to be a rough interview. So we give them the opportunity, just the permission to just ramble and go on tangents. Your job is just to, we say your job is just talk. Just talk. That's your job. Our job as the video people is to make you sound good in the edit. So you're going to look at this video after, you're going to feel really insecure about how this interview went. And you're going to be like, oh, I wish I said it this way, or I said this dumb thing. And then you're going to watch this video and go, oh my gosh, I sound great. I gotten that feedback from folks a lot that showed up really nervous, and then they see the video and it's like, I said that. So so we want to set that expectation. What to wear, you know, fill in the blank here. We'll change this to whatever the dress code should be. The framing will be mostly waist up or whatever the framing is. That's a common question that we get that people want to know. Are their thighs going to be in it? Are their hands going to be in it? Where are we looking here? So they just want to know in their head like what this frame is going to look like. So we kind of give them that ahead of time. We tell them avoid wearing anything like real thin, tight patterns, like tight pinstripes. So if you know much about video, if you've ever seen a video where their shirt was just doing this, like optical illusions, it's because there's tight patterns on there and the camera is catching that and it's making like this almost like a magic eye, like optical illusion type thing. And you don't want that. That's called moire, and moire is bad. So you want them to wear something like this, plain shirt, or something with patterns is fine as long as they're not like really, really tight, like tight pinstripes. And then bring an extra top in case we need to switch something out. I did have filmed for one school. We filmed with a plain background. We were doing some like HR recruiting, like recruiting videos for faculty, recruiting new staff and stuff like that. One person showed up in the exact hue of red that the background was, a dress, head to toe, same color. And and we were like, oh my gosh. Thank God we asked everyone to bring a second outfit. She had another dress that she changed into that worked perfectly, but it was just a funny moment of like, if she didn't have something else, she would just been like a floating head and arms. So you want to have some options in case you need to change something out. And then we tell them wear matte finish makeup if you wear makeup. Glossy makeup looks great in person. It just looks like oily skin on camera. It does not look good. It looks like they're sweating. So we tell them just matte finish. Okay, so those are expectations that we set, and that's really important in getting them to feel comfortable, know what's coming, that kind of thing. So now we get into ChatGPT. So I use ChatGPT extensively to speed up my workflow when coming up with a question list. It just helps me spark ideas, helps me find blind spots in our storytelling, and just helps me get up and running faster. So we want to tell it what we're going for. What's the project? Sometimes, if the client has sent us a creative brief, I'll just upload the creative brief. And then, start with a seed question list. Here's the types of questions that we're trying to answer. Here's the kind of responses we're looking for. Ask it to help you expand your questions to elicit deeper responses, expand on them and remix them. And then ask it to help you find blind spots in your question list. So this is a prompt you can use out of the box. I'm interviewing some alumni or whatever you want to say for school for a video series. The goal is to promote exciting things they're doing in their careers post-graduation. I want my interview questions to elicit storytelling. Below are some basic questions I'd like to ask. Help me expand on this list with questions that will elicit deeper responses. Write me 20 additional questions I could ask. Oops. Sorry about that. Write me 20 additional questions I could ask that would give me a well-rounded interview, including a few fill-in-the-blank prompts that would encourage short, impactful sound bites, and then insert, a seed question list. Sometimes a client will send us, 10 or 15 questions, and then we'll just put that in there as just kind of get ChatGPT going on something. So that is what you can do. Storytelling Coach. This is a custom GPT I found recently, and it does a really great job at assisting you in coming up with good questions, as well as analyzing transcripts. So the way we used to edit videos is we'd watch through an entire interview, we'd take notes on what they said, and continuously go back through scrubbing through the videos to find that spot and to find different parts to pull out. And when you multiply that amount of work by 5 or 6 interviews, that just process just eats up a ton of time in putting together that first draft of the video. So what we do now is we export a transcript of each interview, upload those into Storytelling Coach here, and prompt it as we're editing. So we're having this conversation with the GPT as we're going. So we say like, here's 6 interviews we did, blah, blah, blah. Here's what we're going for. This is kind of messaging, yada, yada. And then you ask it specific questions. So we don't ask it like, okay, tell me exactly how this video what they should say in order, like make the video for me. I mean, I've tried that, but it never does a good job. So what I found is asking it very specific questions. So tell me all of the possible hooks that we could use that would start the video on a novel note or just a unique note or some note of like personality. Um, and so I use that for Data Science Institute of Chicago with Ben. And the first soundbite that it gave me was something that he said that I had forgot that he said this was, if you want to like just walk through the halls and run into a genius, University of Chicago is a pretty great place for that. And I just, I just thought that's a great hook. Just a funny, little quirky thing. And then now we're off to the races. Um, and so doing it this way, the other ways we'll do is like, tell me all the sound bites that such and such says about this one thing. And it'll give you all the, so you just kind of, it's like an editing assistant, and it's just night and day faster, like that. So taking that a step further, when the way that we do things is we typically pre-interview subjects over a Zoom call and record the call. We upload the transcript from that call, because when you record a call, it will automatically create a transcript. We upload that transcript to ChatGPT, give it some background, and so we'll tell it, I'm interviewing James Jonathan. James Jonathan is my nickname for Jimmy John's. It's one of the few jokes that my daughters just think is hilarious every time. So, hey, you want to go get some James Jonathans? So we're interviewing James, who's an alumni of the engineering program. Please digest this transcript attached from my pre-interview with him. The goal is to promote the exciting things, blah, 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 blah. Write me 20 questions. I like asking it for a specific amount of questions because it will just give you like 5 or 10 if you don't. You want a lot of options. Write me 20 questions that I could ask that would result in an expanded version of this pre-interview. Please consider questions I could have asked that I didn't ask so that I'm not missing anything. And that's been really helpful because it'll give me a synopsis and it'll say, okay, your question list is going to result in a really comprehensive video about this. Here's where I think you're missing. You might want to get him talking about his experience with this or that, or a specific story around this. And then oftentimes I'm like, oh, dang, that's actually a good idea. And then I'll build that into the question list. So Storytelling Coach is a good custom GPT to work with. You can also have success just on the plain normal homepage of ChatGPT, like your default conversation. You just want it to, if you're pulling insights from the transcripts, you want to make sure you are really clear that it's giving you verbatim sound bites, because what it likes to do, ChatGPT likes to make things up and kind of summarize things and synthesize sound bites, and we don't want that. At least I don't want that, because I'm going to go look for that exact soundbite in the edit. And if I do a keyword search, it's not going to work if they just made something up. Okay, so we're going to get into Q&A. Go ahead and put some questions into the Q&A if you have any. If you don't, that's fine. While we wait for some questions to pop up, I just want to give you some next steps. I send out a newsletter every Wednesday morning. It's called the Higher Ed Storytellers Digest. You can subscribe to it there. And we talk about content creation and content strategy in higher ed, a lot of this type of stuff, just insights every week. You can find me on LinkedIn. Check out my podcast that I host, Higher Ed Storytelling University. And then if you have video needs or want to have a question or whatever else, you can reach me. It's my email. So that is that. Um, okay, Mary, what strategies do you recommend for students who just give one word or short answers on repeat? Yeah, this is this is a tough one. I've had one interview like this where the person was so nervous and just gave one word answers. And honestly, like, thank God, like it was for a kind of like an urban youth program thing. So he had like his like caseworker was there too. I ended up being like, really encouraging, like, oh man, you did great. Like, awesome. Thank you so much. And then I was like, hey, like caseworker, why don't you do an interview with you too? And she gave us all she kind of told his story a bit more elaborately. So that is one step. If someone is just having a hard time, you might bring in another person to interview that can help narrate a little bit from an outside perspective. Um, Otherwise, just trying to set expectations about what you're going for is helpful. So, if they can kind of visualize what you're after, they might be less inclined to just answer your questions point blank. If you're like, hey man, you're the voice of this story, so they're not going to hear me ask the questions. So, I need you to just talk because we're going to edit this and pull out a chunk here and there. And you don't have to be nervous, but just talk and we'll do the rest. And so that can be one way to kind of encourage them out of their shell a little bit. But that's a super tough situation that I'm not super great in, to be honest. Um, what do you do if an interviewee can't think of an answer to a question or multiple questions? From Abby. Um, this is why I send them the questions ahead of time, because I don't, they get really in their head and they sit there and they think and they've got all these people staring at them, waiting for them to respond. Um, and so that can be difficult. Really just maybe sometimes giving them a sample of what you're looking for, like kind of just answer the question for them. Give them a frame of reference for how, the kind of answer you're looking for. That's one trick that I use sometimes. Again, just a lot of times when people just can't think of an answer, I'll just say, I just want you to process out loud for me. Like we're probably not even going to include this in the video. We probably will. We're still recording. Um, but we just want them to process out loud. I'm like, we're just talking. Just tell me what you're thinking. Like, tell me where your head's at. Like, any thought that comes to mind, just process out loud, like what you think about this thing or whatever. And oftentimes that gets them talking. And sometimes we use those side moments where they think we're not recording, to actually get them to talk because they're out of their head. They think they're off camera. Um, all right. With articles for the website, what is a general recommended word count for a student audience? This I don't have a great answer for. Um, like I said, my world is video, so I could tell you, that it is always going to depend. I'll give you the answer from a video perspective in that it always depends on the context and how much time you think that a student is willing to give you in that scenario. If they're just top of funnel, not really on your radar, they're not going to sit through a long article and read that. Absolutely not. But if they're pretty bottom of funnel, like you're on their short list and you send them a story of somebody, they're more likely to read that and you can get away with a lot more. I mean, kids listen to podcasts that are 2 hours long. I think Joe Rogan's like 2 hours or something like that. Netflix series, they'll just sit and watch it, but that's because they've agreed to be invested in that content. If you don't have their commitment to be invested in the content, then you got to be real short. Let's see. When you have a small team, Denise says, when you have a small team, one videographer, what's the best way to get editing done so projects are done in a timely fashion? Um, well, hire an editor. That's what I would say. But no, I really think that you have to throttle your expectations about what one videographer can do. There's a podcast episode, Denise, that I did, um, I think it's a few episodes ago on the podcast talking about managing like in-house staff versus outsourcing. And we talk about that, like what happens when you have this bottleneck of one videographer, you have to throttle your expectations about what they can do. Um, but the fill in the blank questions, things like that, being really strategic about how you frame those questions can really speed up the editing process. And also using ChatGPT and stuff like that to kind of speed up that editing process is a huge help. So that because like we'll do like student testimonials for schools, and we try to structure the question list so that we can, because we have them priced kind of kind of accessibly for schools, and we try to, and the way that we can do that is we try to structure the question list in a way that lets our editors kind of get in and know what they're looking for, know where to find it. And so that's one way is you strategize. Maybe you strategize the question list by you get their story ahead of time in the pre-interview, and then you just go point by point. Like, here's the beginning of the video. We'll ask them a question to result in this line here, and then here's the next part of his story. We'll ask them a question about that, so that your editor can just go through and kind of go in a linear fashion and not be hopping around looking for sound bites. Would you do any of this for person on the street videos, for quick interviews, for social media video? Yeah, I mean, those questions that you ask are super valuable. I mean, I think that might change the nature of the questions. What I like to think about these man on the street videos is like, what's an engaging question that's going to get people talking in the comments? So one that I saw from Central Michigan University, they asked, where does up north start? And in Michigan, we have, this is where I live. And then we have like up north, and like somewhere around here, up north starts, and you get into like vacation zone where people go up to vacation. But it's a big debate on where that starts. And so they just kind of sparked that debate in the comments. And I just thought that was one really simple question to ask. Those fill in the blank prompts can be a good way to, when we talk about that on that Talking Tactics episode about these man on the street videos and how fill in the blank question prompts can be used for that. Okay, advice on ways to make the interview less staged. The questions, the background, the acting for B-roll, posing. Yeah, I mean, I think it's that's where we're looking for personality, and that's why we're designing questions that are going to get them to say something not expected, because it's going to come across more natural. The fact that Ben said, without this program I would be so bored, like now he just feels like a real person, right? So we've set him up with a question, and we've teed him up to answer in any way he wants to, and we're hoping that he comes out with some sort of personality. And so we're designing questions that way. Acting for B-roll is always tough when you're getting people to pose. Um, that really, my my strategy with B-roll is always to create situations that are actually happening. So I will say, I want you to actually build this thing with the wires. I'm about to do a film on a engineering student who built a heart monitor. So we're going into the lab, and I told him in the pre-interview, I'm like, I want you to literally build, like, take some of the wires out and then like literally build this thing. We'll just kind of hop around and get some different angles. Because I want that, because if they're staging everything, especially if you're working with non-actors, they're going to go real slow, and it's going to be real, they're going to be really self-aware. So you really just want them to, with B-roll, just to go do the thing. And then film, just like forget the cameras there. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's what I do. And then do you send this, John asks, do you send the subjects a draft of the video for them to review and approve? Yes, absolutely. I mean, I've done videos where, we've done the finished video, and 6 months later, I'll reach out to that person and be like, hey, how'd you like the video? They're like, I never saw it. and it's been live on YouTube for for 6 months now. And so that's out of our hands. I mean, like me as a videographer, that's I deliver the video, whatever they do with it, who approves it, who sees it is not my responsibility. So I let the client handle that stuff, but I always encourage clients, yes, make sure you run this by people before it goes live, because I mean that's their image you're representing. You're not necessarily, and you might think, well, I don't want to invite a bunch of feedback that's going to throw a wrench in this thing. I'll just tell you, as a videographer, I've only ever had that be an issue one time, and it wasn't really even an issue. I interviewed this one person who had a really sensitive story. She was a human trafficking survivor, and it was really important to her to be represented accurately and in a way that she was comfortable with, in the way that was going to not put her in a dangerous situation and expose something about her story that would her perpetrator would find her or something like that. So we sent her that, and she did have a lot of comments, and we just worked with her on that. So, but yes, always send them the drafts for approval. All right. Well, this has been awesome. Thanks everyone for participating, for all the great comments and all the great questions. Reach out to me if you have any questions additionally or have any video needs. And thank you for coming. All right, I'm going to end this thing.